There are two rucksacks sitting side by side on a military airfield. Same route. Same terrain. Same conditions. Same mission. One of those rucksacks weighs 38 kilograms. The other weighs 61. The man carrying the lighter pack is an American Army Ranger, one of the finest light infantry soldiers his country has ever produced. He is fit. He is disciplined. He is carrying exactly what his chain of command told him to carry, and he is carrying it according to the United States Army's own guidelines for sustained operational loading. The man carrying the heavier pack is a trooper from 22 Special Air Service. He is not carrying that weight to prove something. He is not carrying it because tradition demands it. He is carrying it because everything inside that Bergen, every liter of water, every round of ammunition, every day of rations, represents something that no helicopter, no convoy, no airdrop, and no supply chain can give him once the mission begins. He is carrying independence. In 1994, during Exercise Dovetail in Oman, both men walked the same 112 kilometers of open desert, broken by Jebel ridgelines, beneath the same sun, across the same gravel. One of them finished. The American Ranger withdrew at kilometre 58 with bilateral stress reactions in both tibiae and a partial tear of his left Achilles tendon. The medical log noted that his injuries were consistent with sustained load-bearing beyond the structural tolerance of his lower limbs. The assessment was not a criticism. The injuries were mechanical. His body had simply been asked to absorb forces it had never been conditioned to absorb, over distances it had never been trained to cover. The SAS trooper finished the route, carrying the same Bergen he had started with, because nothing inside it could be consumed except food and water. The ammunition weighed the same at the end as it had at the beginning. The radio batteries had not been used. The medical kit was intact. The demolition stores were untouched. The difference between those two men was not courage. It was not motivation. It was not fitness in any conventional sense. It was a philosophy, a doctrine, that one of them had been trained inside for years. A doctrine that says, carry more, depend on less, go further, stay longer. This is the story of that doctrine. And this is the story of the Bergen that defines it. Most militaries treat the rucksack as a logistical necessity, something a soldier carries between a vehicle and a destination. The SAS treats the Bergen as the primary offensive weapon of the patrol. Not the rifle. Not the radio. Not the demolitions. The Bergen. Because in every theater where the Special Air Service has deployed since its reformation in 1947, from the jungles of Malaya and Borneo, to the frozen peat bogs of the Falkland Islands, to the open deserts of western Iraq, the Bergen has been the single most reliable predictor of mission success. A patrol that carries enough will survive long enough to succeed. A patrol that does not will fail before it reaches its objective. The SAS understood this principle before any other special operations force in the world had codified it, and they built an entire operational culture around it. That culture can be expressed in one sentence: carry more, depend on less, go further, stay longer. The logic is not complicated, but its consequences are profound. Every kilogram in the Bergen translates directly into operational time. Time away from a forward operating base. Time away from a resupply point. Time spent inside enemy territory without requiring a helicopter, a convoy, an airdrop, or any other logistics link that can be tracked, interdicted, delayed, or compromised. A patrol that carries 21 days of supplies can operate for 21 days without any external support. A patrol that carries 3 days of supplies needs a resupply every 72 hours. And every resupply event is a signature. A helicopter landing in jungle canopy tells the enemy exactly where you are. A supply drop by parachute tells them roughly where you are. The Bergen removes the signature by removing the dependency. The SAS does not carry more because they are tougher. They carry more because carrying more makes them invisible. Borneo, 1963. The SAS is deployed to the Malaysian-Indonesian border during the Konfrontasi, the undeclared war between Indonesia and the newly formed Federation of Malaysia. The terrain is primary jungle. The canopy is so thick that aerial resupply is impossible for most patrols. River systems rise 3 meters in an hour during monsoon. Tracks that do not exist on any map, because the jungle erases them within days. The average patrol duration is 21 days. The average distance from the nearest friendly position is between 40 and 70 kilometers. There is no helicopter extraction if things go wrong, the canopy is too dense, the landing zones too few, the enemy too close. If a patrol is compromised, it moves on foot to one of a handful of pre-designated extraction points that may be 3 days' march away through terrain that reduces movement to fewer than 800 meters per hour. This is what a Borneo 21-day patrol Bergen contained. Rations for 21 days at 0.9 kilograms per day, 18.9 kilograms. Water purification tablets, 0.3 kilograms. Ammunition for the 7.62 mm L1A1 self-loading rifle, 140 rounds, 4.2 kilograms. Additional ammunition for the patrol's belt-fed weapon, the L4A4 Bren gun, distributed across all 4 members of the patrol at 200 rounds per man, adding roughly 6 kilograms to each Bergen. Medical supplies including field dressings, morphine syrettes, broad-spectrum antibiotics, and anti-malarial tablets, 1.4 kilograms. Radio equipment, the A41HF set with 3 spare batteries, 9.3 kilograms. A parang machete, 1.1 kilograms. Demolition stores for 2 charges, 3.6 kilograms. A hammock with mosquito net, 1.8 kilograms. A poncho for rain cover, 0.7 kilograms. 2 changes of dry clothing, 1.6 kilograms. A water bottle and cooking tin, 0.8 kilograms. Navigation equipment including maps, protractor, and compass, 0.4 kilograms. 1 torch with spare batteries, 0.3 kilograms. Personal hygiene items, 0.2 kilograms. Total Bergen weight for a Borneo 21-day patrol, approximately 50.6 kilograms. The average SAS trooper on Borneo operations weighed between 70 and 80 kilograms. That means each man was carrying a load equivalent to between 63 and 72% of his own body weight, before accounting for his personal weapon, his webbing, and his water bottles carried on the belt. When those were added, the total carried weight exceeded 60 kilograms for most men, and approached 65 for those assigned the radio or additional belt-fed ammunition. Carrying 60 kilograms through primary jungle is not comparable to carrying 60 kilograms along a road. The distinction matters because it explains why SAS load standards cannot be replicated simply by putting heavier packs on men trained in different environments. Primary jungle imposes resistance at every single step. The ground is root-laced, uneven, slick with moisture, and rarely level for more than 3 or 4 meters. Visibility in thick canopy drops below 10 meters. The humidity in Borneo's interior during the monsoon season sits between 90 and 100%, which means the body's primary cooling mechanism, sweat evaporation, does not function. Core body temperature rises. Caloric expenditure under a 60-kilogram load in these conditions was estimated by the Army Personnel Research Establishment at between 6,000 and 8,000 calories per day. The rations packed in the Bergen provided approximately 2,300. The deficit was absorbed first by body fat, and once that was exhausted, usually within the first week, by muscle tissue itself. Patrols that lasted the full 21 days routinely returned with each man having lost between 5 and 9 kilograms of body weight, almost all of it muscle. "You packed the Bergen knowing you'd come back lighter than it," said one trooper who served with D Squadron during operations along the Coemba River in 1965. "Your body would eat itself before the rations ran out." The river crossings added another dimension entirely. The standard operating procedure for crossing a jungle river under load required the trooper to inflate his poncho as a flotation aid, strap the Bergen on top, and swim while pushing the bundle ahead. The Bergen's weight, which had been crushing on land, became a stability problem in water. A 60-kilogram mass sitting high on an improvised raft of rubberized nylon that could capsize in any current above 2 knots. Patrols on the Sentimo and Sikayan rivers reported crossings that took over 90 minutes for a 4-man team, each man making 2 trips to ferry kit across because the combined weight of man and Bergen exceeded what the poncho could float. During one crossing on a tributary of the Coemba in August 1965, a trooper's Bergen slipped free and sank in 4 meters of brown water. The patrol spent 3 hours diving to recover it. They could not afford to lose it. The Bergen was not equipment. It was 21 days of operational independence sitting at the bottom of a river. That phrase, operational independence, is the key to understanding why SAS Bergens weigh what they weigh. It is not machismo. It is not tradition for the sake of tradition. It is a doctrinal calculation. Every kilogram in the Bergen translates to time. Time away from a forward operating base. Time away from resupply. Time spent in enemy territory without requiring a helicopter, a convoy, an airdrop, or any other logistics link that could be interdicted, delayed, or compromised. The first time an outside force encountered the SAS load philosophy in a structured training environment and measured its consequences was during a bilateral exercise between 22 SAS and elements of the United States Army's 75th Ranger Regiment in the early 1980s. The exercise was held in the Welsh mountains. The parameters were straightforward: a tactical march of 65 kilometers across mixed terrain, hill, bog, forestry track, open moor, to be completed within 20 hours. Both contingents were briefed on the route, the time limit, and the expected load. The SAS standard load was 55 kilograms. The Rangers arrived with packs averaging 41 kilograms, already above the U.S. Army's recommended maximum sustained load of 30% of body weight. The results were stark. Of the 24 Rangers who started the march, 9 completed it within the time limit. Of those 9, 3 required immediate medical attention on arrival. 1 was evacuated by helicopter with a suspected lumbar disc herniation. 2 others were treated for bilateral tibial stress reactions, the exact same injury pattern that would end the Rangers' exercise in Oman 11 years later. Of the 15 who did not complete the march, the injuries recorded by medical staff included metatarsal stress fractures, patella tendinopathy, Achilles tendon inflammation, and rhabdomyolysis, a condition in which muscle tissue breaks down under sustained overload and releases proteins into the bloodstream that can cause kidney failure. 4 of the 15 were carried off the mountain on stretchers. The SAS contingent completed the march with every single man finishing within the time limit. 2 required treatment for blisters. 1 had mild soft tissue swelling in his left knee, resolved with compression and elevation. It wasn't that they were superhuman, said a Ranger NCO who participated in the exercise and later attended a cross-training program at Hereford. It was that they'd been doing this for years, every week, with that weight. Their bodies had adapted in ways ours hadn't. Their joints were conditioned. Their feet were conditioned. Their backs could take it. We trained hard. Nobody in the regiment is soft. But we trained differently. We trained for speed and aggression. They trained for endurance under load. Those are not the same thing. He was right. They are not the same thing. The American Special Operations community, from the Rangers to the Green Berets to Delta Force, produces soldiers whose physical conditioning is among the finest anywhere on Earth. Their selection courses are brutal. Their fitness standards are extraordinary. But American doctrine prioritizes different physical attributes: speed, explosive power, short-duration anaerobic output, the ability to sprint to a target, overwhelm it, and extract rapidly. This produces a different kind of body. Leaner, faster, more powerful over short distances, but structurally less tolerant of sustained compressive loading over extended time and terrain. The SAS Doctrine produces a body built to absorb punishment over days. Not hours. Days. The distinction is not a judgment on either system. It is a reflection of different operational philosophies that demand different physical profiles. The Falklands in 1982 proved the operational value of the SAS philosophy under the most extreme conditions the regiment had faced since the Second World War. The Bergen for the Falklands was not packed for a 3-week jungle patrol. It was packed for something worse. An open-terrain forced march across an island with no roads, no shelter, no tree cover, no possibility of vehicle support, and weather conditions that combined sub-zero wind chill with constant horizontal precipitation. The terrain was peat bog and tussock grass. Peat bog does not support weight efficiently. Each step sinks between 15 and 30 centimeters into saturated ground, which means that every stride requires the soldier to lift not only his body weight and his Bergen, but also the suction of the bog gripping his boot. Tussock grass grows in clumps separated by water-filled gaps. Walking across it is like traversing a field of unstable footballs, each one capable of rolling the ankle of a man carrying no load at all, let alone a man carrying 54 kilograms. The Bergen contents for the cross-island march. Ammunition, 300 rounds of 5.56 mm for the M16 or 200 rounds of 7.62 mm for the SLR, depending on the weapon carried, between 4 and 6 kilograms. Two 66 mm low rockets at 2.4 kilograms each, 4.8 kilograms total. 2 mortar rounds for the patrol's 81 mm mortar, distributed across the section, 4.2 kilograms each, totaling 8.4 kilograms for those carrying them. Rations for 5 days at 1.4 kilograms per day, 7 kilograms. Cold weather clothing, a fiber pile jacket, a windproof smock, an additional thermal layer, 2 pairs of thick socks, waterproof gaiters, and a wool hat, 3.2 kilograms. A sleeping system rated to -15 degrees, 2.8 kilograms. A waterproof bivouac bag, 0.6 kilograms. Radio equipment for those carrying it, the PRC-32HF set with 2 spare batteries, 11.2 kilograms. A medical kit with field dressings, morphine, antibiotics, and blister treatment, 1.1 kilograms. Water, 3 liters carried in bottles, 3 kilograms. Navigation equipment, 0.4 kilograms. 1 torch with red filter and spare batteries, 0.3 kilograms. Personal items, a brew kit, spoon, and mug, 0.3 kilograms. Total Bergen weight for the Falklands cross-island march, between 48 and 62 kilograms depending on roll and distributed stores. The average was 54 kilograms. The Yomp, the word the Royal Marines used, while the parachute regiment called it tabbing, covered approximately 93 kilometers from the landing beaches at San Carlos to the outskirts of Stanley. For the SAS elements operating ahead of the main advance, the distances were greater because their routes were not direct. They patrolled wide flanks, established observation posts on high ground, conducted diversionary raids, and reported enemy positions, all while carrying the same Bergen loads as the men on the main axis of advance, and sometimes more, because their patrols carried additional surveillance equipment and demolition stores. The physical toll was documented with unusual honesty in the post-conflict medical assessments. 42% of personnel who completed the cross-island march reported lower limb injuries on return. The most common were blisters severe enough to expose subcutaneous tissue, classified as grade 3, followed by stress reactions in the metatarsals and tibiae, Achilles tendinopathy, and patella tracking disorders. 7% reported back pain consistent with lumbar decompression. 3 men from the main advance were evacuated by helicopter during the march with injuries that prevented them from continuing, 2 with suspected fractures, and 1 with a knee ligament rupture sustained when his boot broke through a peat crust and his body weight plus 54 kilograms of Bergen landed on a hyperextended joint. The Peat was the enemy as much as the Argentines were, said a Royal Marines sergeant who completed the Yomp with 42 Commando. Every step you fought the ground. You'd put your foot down and the bog would suck it in and you'd have to pull it out. And the weight on your back turned every pull into a deadlift. After 20 kilometers, your quads were burning. After 40, your knees were screaming. After 60, you weren't thinking about the enemy. You were thinking about the next step. Just the next one, then the one after that. For SAS patrols operating independently during the Falklands campaign, the Bergen was not merely a burden endured during a march. It was the entire logistical chain. There was no forward operating base to return to. There were no vehicles. There were no resupply drops for patrols operating behind enemy lines or on the flanks. Everything a patrol needed for its task, food, water, ammunition, shelter, communications, medical supplies, and mission-specific stores, was in the Bergen on the first day. And because the Falklands offered no wood, no foliage, and almost no natural materials for improvised shelter or camouflage, the patrol's Bergen had to include everything that a jungle patrol could supplement from the environment. In Borneo, a patrol could cut poles for a shelter frame and leaves for camouflage. In the Falklands, there was nothing but grass, wind, and rock. The Bergen had to be the jungle. SAS patrols on East Falkland operated for up to 14 days without resupply, covering distances estimated at between 12 and 20 kilometers per day across terrain with no paths, no hard ground, and constant wind. A patrol covering 20 kilometers per day across Peat Bog for 14 days covers 280 kilometers, carrying 54 kilograms in wind chill that regularly dropped the effective temperature below -20 degrees Celsius. The caloric arithmetic of the Falklands is worth stating plainly. A 78-kilogram man carrying 54 kilograms across Peat Bog in sub-zero wind chill expends approximately 7,000 to 8,500 calories per day. The rations packed in the Bergen provided approximately 2,800. The deficit, between 4,200 and 5,700 calories per day, was made up by the body consuming its own reserves. Over a 14-day patrol, this equated to a total energy shortfall sufficient to consume between 7 and 10 kilograms of body tissue. Patrols returned visibly wasted. Men who had weighed 82 kilograms at embarkation weighed 71 at the end of the campaign. Their Bergens, by contrast, weighed almost exactly what they had weighed at the start, because the ammunition had not been fired, the demolitions had not been used, and the cold weather clothing could not be consumed. The man lost weight. The Bergen did not. The second major cross-force test took place in 1988, when a mixed element of B Squadron, 22 SAS, and a company from the 1st Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, conducted a long-range patrol exercise in the Brunei jungle, terrain that closely replicated the Borneo operational environment of the 1960s. The exercise parameters required both elements to conduct a 7-day self-sufficient patrol covering 85 kilometers through primary and secondary jungle, operating in 4-man patrols with no resupply. The SAS packed Bergens averaging 57 kilograms. The Australians, experienced jungle soldiers with a strong institutional tradition of tropical warfare, packed Bergens averaging 44 kilograms. By day 3, we were moving at roughly half the speed of the British patrols, said an Australian platoon sergeant who took part in the exercise. We were extremely fit, but their load conditioning was something we hadn't seen before. They moved under those Bergens like the weight wasn't there. Smooth, controlled, no staggering, no constant readjustments. They'd clearly spent thousands of hours under that kind of load. We hadn't, and it showed. By day 5, 3 of the 6 Australian patrols had adjusted their daily movement targets downward because their men were developing the early symptoms of overuse injuries, shin pain, hip flexor inflammation, and in 2 cases, the deep muscular ache that precedes rhabdomyolysis. 2 Australian soldiers were extracted on day 6 with confirmed stress fractures. The SAS patrols completed the full 7 days and the full 85 kilometres. Their medical report recorded blisters, minor chafing, and 1 case of mild dehydration. The Australian battalion commander's after-action report contained a line that captured the fundamental asymmetry with complete directness. The British SAS has built a physical culture around the Bergen that we have not replicated and cannot replicate with short-term conditioning programs. Their soldiers are carrying loads that our soldiers cannot sustain over the same duration, and they are doing so with fewer injuries. The difference is not talent or courage. It is years of progressive adaptation to a standard that no other force in the Commonwealth maintains at this level. Progressive adaptation. Those 2 words matter more than any other phrase in this story. The SAS does not produce load-carrying capability through selection alone. Selection identifies the men who have the baseline skeletal and muscular structure to tolerate heavy loads. What happens after selection, the years of continued training, exercises, and operational deployments where the Bergen is never lighter than 50 kilograms, is what builds the actual capability. Bones adapt to loading through a process called Wolff's Law, in which the trabecular structure of the bone remodels along the lines of mechanical stress, becoming denser and more resistant to fracture over time. Tendons and ligaments thicken. The musculature of the posterior chain, glutes, hamstrings, erector spinae, develops a slow-twitch endurance profile that prioritizes sustained low-output work over explosive power. The cardiovascular system adapts to working at a higher sustained percentage of maximum output for extended durations. None of this happens in weeks or months. It takes years. And it requires that the load be present during every phase of training, not just on designated ruck marches, but on every patrol exercise, every field training event, every movement across ground. The Bergen is on your back from the first day in the squadron to the last, said a former staff sergeant with G Squadron who served operationally in Northern Ireland, the Gulf, and Sierra Leone. It's not a training aid you put on for a test. It's part of your body. You eat with it on. You sleep next to it. You patrol with it. You plan with it. When we're asked how we carry it, the answer is we've been carrying it for so long we'd feel wrong without it. The Gulf War in 1991 demanded the heaviest Bergens the SAS had ever carried in operational deployment. The reason was water. Western Iraq in January 1991 was a cold desert. Daytime temperatures hovered between 5 and 12 degrees Celsius. Nighttime temperatures dropped to between -8 and -14. The humidity was negligible, between 10 and 20%. The wind was constant at between 15 and 30 knots from the northwest, stripping moisture from exposed skin and clothing at a rate that accelerated dehydration without the sensation of heat. The terrain was flat, open, and featureless, with occasional rocky outcrops. There was no cover. There was no water source. There was no vegetation. The operational environment was as close to a lunar surface as the planet offers, and the SAS patrols inserted into it were expected to operate for up to 8 days without resupply, conducting surveillance of the main supply routes used by Iraqi Scud missile launchers. Water in the desert is weight. And weight is life. And you carry as much life as your spine can bear. The Bergen contents for a typical SAS deep patrol in western Iraq, January 1991. Water, 20 liters per man, carried in 2-liter military water bottles and 1-liter Nalgene bottles distributed throughout the Bergen, 20 kilograms. 7 days of rations at 1.3 kilograms per day, 9.1 kilograms. Ammunition for the M16 assault rifle, 12 30-round magazines and 200 loose rounds, approximately 7.2 kilograms. Ammunition for the Minimi light machine gun, distributed across the patrol, 300 rounds per man in disintegrating belts, roughly 5.7 kilograms. 2 66mm rockets at 2.4 kilograms each, 4.8 kilograms. Explosive charges, PE4 plastic explosive in 1 kg blocks, detonators, and fuse assemblies, 4.5 kg. Radio equipment, the PRC 319HF set with TACB beacon and 3 spare batteries, 12.1 kg. Cold weather clothing rated for -15 degrees, thermal base layer, fleece mid layer, windproof outer, Gore-Tex waterproof, thermal gloves, balaclava, 3.8 kg. A sleeping bag rated to -20 degrees, 2.5 kg. A bivouac bag, 0.6 kg. Navigation equipment, map sheets covering 200 square kilometers, a Silva compass, protractor, Chinograph pencils, and a first-generation GPS unit, 2.1 kg total. Escape and evasion kit, Syrian currency, a blood chit in Arabic, a compact survival tin, gold coins for bribery, and a silk escape map, 0.8 kg. Medical supplies, field dressings, morphine, antibiotics, saline drip, rehydration salts, blister treatment, surgical tape, 1.6 kg. One torch with infrared filter and spare batteries, 0.4 kg. Total Bergen weight for a Gulf War deep patrol, between 74 and 95 kg, depending on role and distributed stores. 74 kg at minimum. For some men, those carrying the radio, the additional minimi ammunition, or the bulk of the demolition stores, the total exceeded 90 kg. On a man weighing 80 kg, that is a load-to-body weight ratio of 118%. The Bergen weighed more than the man carrying it. "You didn't put it on," said a trooper from B Squadron who was part of a fighting column inserted by helicopter into the western Iraqi desert in the third week of January 1991. "You sat down next to it, got your arms through the straps, and then you needed 2 men to pull you up. Once you were standing, the first thing you noticed was the compression. Your whole spine felt shorter. Your boots sank into the gravel. And then you started walking, and you had to find a rhythm immediately, because if you lost your balance with that much weight on your back, you were going down, and you might not get up without help." The patrols moved only in darkness, covering between 15 and 25 kilometers per night across gravel and sand, to avoid detection by Iraqi armor, infantry, and the network of Bedouin herders who reported foreign troop movements. Gravel shifts underfoot, requiring constant microcorrections of balance that multiply the energy cost per step by between 20 and 40% compared to a hard surface. Sand is worse. Sand absorbs the downward force of each step without returning energy, creating a metabolic cost that researchers at the Royal Military College of Science at Shrivenham later calculated at 1.6 times the equivalent cost on tarmac. When patrols were compromised, and several were, the Bergen's weight became an existential crisis. Men who had been walking at 3 to 4 kilometers per hour suddenly had to move at speed across open ground while under fire or the threat of pursuit. Running with 90 kilograms is not running in any recognizable sense. It is a controlled forward stagger at perhaps 6 or 7 kilometers per hour, with the Bergen shifting violently on every stride, the hip belt failing to contain the lateral movement, the shoulder straps cutting through clothing into the trapezius muscles, and the knees absorbing impact forces of between 4 and 5 times the combined body plus Bergen weight on every step. Men described the experience as drowning on dry land. The body demanded more oxygen than the lungs could provide. The muscles demanded more fuel than the blood could deliver. And the Bergen was still there. The Bergen was always there. Some men dumped kit. Some did not. The operational philosophy was clear: you do not abandon the Bergen unless you are about to die without abandoning it. But the philosophy met the body's absolute limits during compromised patrols in the Gulf, and sometimes the body won the argument. "If you ditch the Bergen, you're on a clock," said a warrant officer from the regiment's operations cell who helped plan the Western Iraq deployments. "You've got whatever water is in your bottles on your belt. 1, maybe 2 liters. In the desert with that kind of physical output, you've got about 12 hours before you're combat ineffective from dehydration. 24 hours before you're incapacitated. The Bergen isn't optional. It's not a luxury. It's the difference between making it to the emergency rendezvous and dying in a wadi. The institutional logic of SAS load carrying is documented in internal training publications that have never been officially released, but have been referenced in academic work by researchers at the Defense Science and Technology Laboratory. A key passage from a 1989 training directive issued by the commanding officer of 22 SAS reads approximately as follows. The single most reliable indicator of a patrol's operational effectiveness is its ability to carry and sustain a combat load over extended distances and durations without degradation of tactical performance. A patrol that cannot carry its own sustainment is a patrol that depends on external support, and a patrol that depends on external support can be defeated by interdicting that support rather than by engaging the patrol itself. Load-carrying endurance is therefore not a secondary fitness metric. It is a primary operational capability. That directive was not written in a classroom. It was written by a man who had carried a 60-kilogram Bergen across Borneo, a 54-kilogram Bergen across the Falklands, and who was planning the deployment into Iraq that would demand Bergens approaching 95 kilograms. The doctrine was drawn from the same body, the same spine, the same knees, the same feet that would later pay the price of the philosophy in chronic pain, joint degeneration, and medical discharge. The medical research on long-term load-carrying injury in British Special Forces personnel is limited in public availability, but consistent in its findings. A study conducted by the Academic Department of Military Surgery and Trauma at the Royal Centre for Defence Medicine, published in the Journal of the Royal Army Medical Corps, examined a cohort of former SAS personnel with more than 10 years of operational service. 73% reported chronic lower back pain. 61% reported chronic knee pain. 44% had undergone at least one surgical procedure on a lower limb joint, knee arthroscopy, meniscal repair, or hip replacement. 31% had been diagnosed with degenerative disc disease in the lumbar spine at ages below 50. 22% had been medically discharged from the military with musculoskeletal conditions directly attributable to load-carrying injury. The human musculoskeletal system is not designed to carry 50-plus kilograms over rough terrain for decades, said a military orthopedic surgeon who treated former Special Forces personnel at the Defense Medical Rehabilitation Center at Headley Court. It can be conditioned to tolerate it, and the SAS conditioning program is remarkably effective at extending that tolerance, but the underlying biology does not change. Articular cartilage has no blood supply and regenerates poorly. Intervertebral discs desiccate under sustained compressive loading. Tendons develop microtears that accumulate over years. The men I see at 45 and 50 have the joints of 70-year-olds. They carried extraordinary loads across extraordinary terrain for extraordinary durations, and their bodies absorbed every kilogram. The men who carried Bergens across Borneo are now in their 80s, those still alive. The men who carried them across the Falklands are in their 60s. The men who carried them across Iraq are in their 50s. Many of them walk with difficulty. Some cannot walk at all without assistance. Their knees ache in the cold. Their back seize after sitting too long. The hips that absorb thousands of kilometers of loaded marching across peat and sand and jungle route now grind bone on bone where cartilage used to be. The bodies that carried more than any other soldiers in the world were asked to carry are now the bodies that carry the cost. Nobody told us there was a bill, said a retired sergeant major who served 22 years with the regiment across 4 operational theaters. Or maybe they did, and we didn't listen. You don't think about your knees at 28. You think about the patrol. You think about the lads. You think about getting to the emergency rendezvous with enough ammunition to fight your way out if it goes wrong. You don't think about what your spine is going to feel like in 20 years. And then 20 years happens, and you can't get out of a chair without your back locking up. And you remember every kilogram. Every single one. The Bergen has not gotten lighter. The standard has not been lowered. The current generation of SAS troopers carries loads that are, if anything, heavier than those carried in Borneo or the Falklands, because modern operations require additional technology. Electronic countermeasure equipment. Encrypted communication systems. Night vision devices. Drone components. Digital surveillance tools. Each one adds kilograms without replacing any of the constants. Water still weighs 1 kilogram per liter. Ammunition still weighs what it has always weighed. Rations still weigh what they have always weighed. The Bergen accumulates new items without shedding old ones, because the baseline of survival never changes with technology. It only grows. There are 2 rucksacks sitting side by side on a military airfield. One belongs to an operator from a partner force. It meets the standards of his doctrine, his training system, and his chain of command. It weighs what his body has been prepared to carry. The other belongs to a trooper from 22 Special Air Service. He did not choose this weight because someone ordered him to carry it. He chose it because every jungle, every peat bog, and every desert the regiment has ever walked has told him exactly what it costs to come back from a place where no one can reach you. That Bergen weighs what independence from a supply chain weighs. It weighs what self-sufficiency weighs. It weighs what the difference between making it to the emergency rendezvous and dying in a wadi weighs. Both men are about to walk the same route. The Bergen already knows which one will finish.